You walked away not in anger, not in revenge, but in quiet dignity. You chose yourself. And the moment you did, something subtle began to shift on the other side of that silence. Not loudly, not immediately, but in a way she never expected. Because for a long time, you weren't just someone in her life. You were time. You were consistency. You were the man who stayed, who gave, who filled the quiet before it ever had a chance to hurt. And when you stepped back, without drama, without explanation, the world didn't collapse. It paused. Brother, most men never understand what happens next. Because while most men rush to chase, to explain, to prove they still matter, you didn't. You chose restraint over reaction. And in that space, a psychological process began unfolding. One that moves through 5 distinct stages. In this video, I'll break down exactly what those 5 stages are, how they unfold inside her mind over time, and why the first thing she feels isn't regret at all, but something far more destabilizing. You'll understand why silence creates pressure words never could, why her reactions shift when you don't, and why most men lose everything by responding at the wrong moment. Before we go deeper, if this channel has helped you find clarity where emotion once, and if you're ready to stop repeating old patterns, start this journey now. Now pause for a second and be honest with yourself. If you've chosen self-respect, even though it still hurts, comment self-respect below. I read every comment, because where you stand matters. Brother, maybe the thing you fear most isn't losing her. Maybe it's going back and losing yourself, because this is where everything changes. The most important stage isn't the one where she reaches out. It's the one that begins the moment your absence starts doing the work, and it starts now. Let's dive in. Stage 1. When your absence hits different. The moment you walk away, she doesn't miss you. She feels off. And that single detail explains why so many men misread everything that happens next. Most men expect longing. They wait for sadness. They brace themselves for regret. But what actually shows up first isn't emotion. It's imbalance. A quiet disruption, a sense that something familiar is suddenly out of place. And that's where the panic begins. Because when you don't see obvious pain, your mind fills the gap with fear. You assume nothing mattered. You assume she's fine. You assume that if you don't act now, you'll lose her forever. So you reach out too early. You explain. You reassure. You break the silence before it's had a chance to do its work. Here's what you didn't see. For a long time, you weren't just a man in her life. You were a rhythm, the one who replied, the one who showed up, the one who filled the silence before it ever became uncomfortable. Your presence wasn't something she consciously chose each day. It became part of her emotional environment, predictable, reliable, assumed, like gravity, always there, never questioned. So when you disappear without drama, no anger, no confrontation, no last message trying to be understood, her mind doesn't register loss yet. But her nervous system does. It waits for the old reflex, the notification, the familiar check-in, the message that always arrived when things felt uncertain and nothing happens. That's the moment things feel different, not painful, unsettling. She checks her phone more often, scrolls without realizing why, posts something vague, a photo, a quote, a half signal that can be denied if called out. Then comes the light text. Hey, how have you been? Nothing emotional, nothing vulnerable, because she isn't reaching out to reconnect. She's asking one quiet question. Are you still there? This is where most men fail without ever knowing it. If you respond quickly, if you rush to soothe the discomfort, to reassure her that you're still accessible, you collapse the moment. You teach her that your absence was temporary, that nothing truly changed, that you're still the same man who will reappear the moment uncertainty shows up. But if you don't, if you remain calm, if you don't perform silence, but hold it, grounded, unreactive, intact, something shifts. because now she isn't sitting with certainty anymore. She's sitting with uncertainty. And uncertainty is the first crack in taking someone for granted. It doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't look like regret. It looks quiet, subtle, almost invisible. But that crack is everything. It's the moment her nervous system realizes that what once felt guaranteed no longer is. And once that realization takes root, the story she's been telling herself can't hold much longer. Because stage one was never about making her miss you. It was about breaking the assumption that you'd always be there. And when that assumption breaks, the next stage begins, whether you're watching or not. Stage 2. The stories she tells herself. When regret should begin, she fights it the hardest. And this is the stage that confuses men more than any other, because on the surface, it looks like you never mattered at all. From the outside, she seems fine, sometimes better than fine. More social, more active, more free. And that's exactly why this stage destabilizes you. You expected cracks. You expected silence to soften her. Instead, you see movement, confidence, relief, or at least the appearance of it. That's when doubt creeps in. You start questioning everything. Did I overestimate my value? Was I too much? Did walking away just make it easier for her? What you're witnessing isn't clarity. It's defense. To avoid facing the possibility that she may have lost a man of real value, she builds a story that protects her identity. Not because she's manipulative, but because the mind resists pain long before it allows awareness. So a new narrative takes shape. In that story, the relationship wasn't that serious. You become too emotional, too intense, or wanted too much. And she tells herself she's better off now, more aligned, more independent, more focused on her life. This story feels empowering. It gives her control back. It shrinks the meaning of your absence into something manageable. She may say it out loud to friends. She may repeat it casually in conversation. And the more it's repeated, the more real it starts to feel, at least on the surface. But beneath that confidence sits an assumption she never questions. That you will break first, that you'll reach out to clear the air, that you'll explain yourself, that you'll come back and restore the old dynamic where you cared more, tried harder, and filled the space the moment it became uncomfortable. That expectation has always been there. It was never tested. Until now. This is where your second, most subtle action matters. You don't correct her story. You don't defend yourself. You don't argue facts or intentions. You let silence do what explanations never could. Because the longer you stay absent, calm, grounded, and unchanged, the harder it becomes for her story to hold together. Days pass, then more days, and the version of you she relied on doesn't show up. The man who would normally reappear doesn't. That's when something shifts. Her narrative requires reinforcement. It needs your reaction to stay believable, and silence offers none. Slowly, the explanations stop soothing. The words she tells herself lose their weight. And in quiet moments, when there's no one to convince and nothing to distract, questions begin to slip through the cracks. Why hasn't he reached out? Why does this feel different? Why doesn't this story bring the relief I expected? She won't call it regret yet, not consciously, not out loud, but something important has changed. For the first time, she's forced to consider that your absence isn't a tactic designed to pull her back in. It's a choice. And once that realization lands, even faintly, her mind has no option but to adjust. Because a man who chooses himself without anger, without punishment, without explanation, is not the man her story was built around. And when the story begins to weaken, memory steps in to fill the space. That's when the past starts rearranging itself, not to punish her, but to reveal what was always there. And that quiet reordering of memory is what carries us into the next stage. Because once denial can no longer protect her, regret doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives slowly. Stage 3. When memory turns against her. Regret doesn't arrive as pain, it arrives as comparison. And this is where the story quietly shifts in a way that can't be reversed. Most men carry a deep fear at this stage. If I don't go back, she'll forget me. She'll move on. I'll fade into the background of her life like I never mattered. But the truth moves in the opposite direction. When you're no longer there, her mind doesn't keep replaying the arguments or the tension. Those moments lose their emotional charge quickly. What remains are the things that once felt too ordinary to notice. Consistency. Presence without calculation. The man who showed up without keeping score. The man who didn't need perfection to offer commitment. Stability never announces itself. It doesn't demand attention. You only recognize its value when it's gone. And that's exactly what happens now. At first, the comparison is subtle. She doesn't sit down and think, I miss him. Instead, she notices how different things feel. New conversations don't land the same. The depth isn't there. The attention comes and goes. Someone may be present in the room, but emotionally, no one stays. Dates start to feel lighter, easier, and, strangely, emptier. Nothing is obviously wrong. There's no betrayal, no clear disappointment, just a quiet sense that something essential is missing. And that absence begins to work on her from the inside. She starts remembering moments she once dismissed. The way you checked in without being asked, the way you listened without trying to control the outcome, the way you remained steady when things weren't easy. What once felt ordinary now feels rare. And here's the part most men never realize. This shift has nothing to do with you trying harder, posting strategically, or proving anything. In fact, the power of this stage depends on you doing the opposite. You don't chase. You don't get jealous. You don't position yourself to be noticed. You continue living with quiet self-respect. The kind that doesn't need to be displayed to be real. The kind that comes from knowing who you are without needing validation. That steadiness, the same steadiness you showed when you walked away, is what sharpens the comparison. Because now she isn't comparing effort, she's comparing presence. And slowly, painfully, a realization begins to form. She didn't just lose someone who wanted her. She lost someone who valued her, someone who stayed consistent without conditions, someone who offered emotional safety without demanding perfection. That realization doesn't hit as a dramatic wave. It settles into the body. A tightness in the chest. A quiet ache when the noise fades. A moment of stillness where the absence feels heavier than expected. This is when regret stops being an idea. It becomes physical. And once an emotion lives in the body, it doesn't stay contained. It looks for relief. It looks for resolution. It looks for a way out. That's why this stage never stays silent for long. Because when comparison becomes undeniable and the absence starts to feel like loss instead of distance, the pressure to release that discomfort begins to rise. And that pressure is what pushes the process forward. Not toward reflection, not toward growth, but toward the next stage, where emotion reaches outward, searching for relief. And that's when everything becomes louder. Stage 4, when fear reaches out. This is the moment most men mistake for victory, and it's also the moment most men undo everything they built. The silence has lasted longer than she expected. The uncertainty has grown heavier than she planned for, and now what once felt like distance starts to feel like loss. The messages change, they get longer. The tone softens. Apologies appear where resistance once lived. Words you waited for, sometimes for months, finally arrive. And with them comes the deepest fear you've been carrying quietly the entire time. If I don't go back now, I'll lose her forever. That fear hits hard, especially for men who have already lost before. Men who gave too much. Men who stayed longer than they should have. Men who don't want to repeat the pain of walking away from something that still feels unfinished. But here is the clarity most men miss in this moment. This is not love returning, this is fear surfacing, fear of the void your absence created, fear of comparison, fear of realizing that what she lost may not be replaceable. Regret has sharpened her awareness, but awareness alone does not equal change. Strong emotion does not mean emotional maturity. Pain does not automatically lead to growth, and wanting the discomfort to stop is not the same as being ready to show up differently. This stage feels convincing because it's intense. Tears carry weight, confessions feel real, promises sound sincere, but intensity is not transformation. It's reaction. And here's where the danger lives. If you rush back now, if you collapse into relief, familiarity and reassurance, you teach her something without ever saying a word. You teach her that losing you has no lasting consequence, that your absence was temporary, that your boundaries soften the moment emotions rise, that enough pain, enough urgency, enough words will always pull you back. And once that lesson is learned, the cycle doesn't end, it resets. This is why strength here doesn't look cold, it looks clear. You don't punish, you don't argue, you don't get swept away by the moment. You slow everything down, you require time instead of reassurance, behavior instead of promises, consistency instead of intensity, not because you're trying to control the outcome, but because you understand something fundamental now. Real change shows up over time, not in moments of panic, not in emotional floods, not when fear is doing the talking. Most men fail here because being wanted again feels like validation, and validation is addictive when you've spent so long feeling overlooked. But a man who has truly walked away doesn't confuse being desired with being respected. He knows why he left, he remembers the cost of staying, and he refuses to trade his self-respect for temporary relief. If you don't fold here, if you stay grounded without bitterness, open without urgency, something unavoidable happens. There's nowhere left for the truth to hide, because now she must confront something she's been trying to outrun. That this isn't about convincing you, it isn't about saying the right words, it isn't about regaining control through emotion, it's about accountability, and accountability can't be rushed. This stage was never meant to pull you back. It was meant to reveal whether your decision was real, and if you hold your ground, not with distance, but with clarity, the process reaches a point of no return. Because once fear can no longer negotiate access, what remains is acceptance, and that is where the final stage begins. Stage 5, when the door closes quietly. The loudest endings are never final. The quiet ones are. And this is the stage most men never reach, not because it doesn't exist, but because it demands a level of inner steadiness few are willing to hold. For most men, the journey stops earlier. They fold when fear shows up. They mistake emotion for change. They return for relief. But if you didn't, if you stayed grounded when it mattered, this is where the story completes itself. At some point, she understands something unmistakable. You're not coming back. Not because you're playing games, not because you want leverage, not because you're trying to teach a lesson, but because you chose yourself. That realization doesn't arrive with drama. There's no explosion, no argument, no final conversation that ties everything into a neat ending. The door doesn't slam. It closes quietly, firmly, with a sense of finality that can't be negotiated. This is where bargaining disappears. Hope fades, and only truth remains. What replaces the emotional noise isn't anger or resentment. It's respect. For the first time, she sees the situation without ego cushioning the edges, without stories to protect her identity, without fear pushing her to reach out. She sees what was lost, not just a relationship, but a man. A man who stayed steady when things were uncertain. A man who showed patience without weakness. A man who didn't need perfection to offer consistency. A man who walked away the moment staying meant betraying his own worth. That recognition carries weight, not relief, not comfort, gravity. Because now there's no illusion left to hide behind. No belief that one more message, one more apology, one more emotional surge could undo what's already been decided. The loss is complete, not imagined, not temporary. And in that completeness, your role in her life changes permanently. You're no longer the ex she compares herself against emotionally. You become the standard she compares others to quietly. The reference point she never announces. The man she thinks about years later, in moments of honesty, and wonders what might have been if she had valued him when she had the chance. But here's the truth that matters more than any of that. By the time this stage arrives, your life no longer revolves around her. You didn't move on out of bitterness. You didn't disappear to be remembered. You didn't stay silent to prove a point. You chose a life where your presence is appreciated, not assumed. Where effort is reciprocated, not taken for granted. Where self-respect is intact, steady, and non-negotiable. Brother, if she regrets losing you, that's her process. If she never fully admits it, that's also her process. Your transformation was never about her reaction. You don't need to go back to prove your value. You don't need validation to confirm who you've become. You already aligned your life with the man you decided to be the moment you walked away. And here is the final truth that ties everything together. You didn't walk away to make her regret it. You walked away because staying required you to abandon yourself. And once a man understands that regret, hers or anyone else's, no longer defines the story. It simply confirms that walking away was never a loss. It was the beginning. So here's the question I'll leave you with. One that cuts through fear, hope, and nostalgia alike. If you went back now, would you be honoring love? Or betraying the man you became when you finally chose yourself? Here's the reflection most men only arrive at after they've lost themselves once. The 5 stages you just heard about were never meant to teach you how to make her regret losing you. They exist to reveal something far more uncomfortable and far more powerful. That regret is not the reward. It's the side effect of a man who finally stops negotiating his worth. At every stage, her mind tried to restore control. Shock tried to pull you back. Denial tried to rewrite history. Regret tried to soften the truth. Desperation tried to bargain for access. And at every stage, you were faced with the same quiet question. Will you abandon yourself again? Or will you stay aligned with who you decided to become? Most men fail not because they lack discipline, but because they mistake being wanted again for being respected again. They hear emotion and assume growth. They feel desired and forget the cost of staying. But a man who has truly walked away understands something different. That love without respect erodes him. That consistency without appreciation becomes self-betrayal. And that silence, when it comes from clarity, is not punishment. It's alignment. Brother, if she regrets losing you, that's her journey. If she never admits it, that's also her journey. Your responsibility was never to manage her emotions. It was to choose a life where your presence is valued, not assumed. And once a man reaches that point, regret, hers or anyone else's, no longer defines the story. It simply confirms this walking away was never the loss. It was the moment you stopped abandoning yourself. And here's where I'll leave you with something most men aren't ready to ask themselves. If she came back tomorrow, with clarity, emotion, and regret in her voice, would you recognize whether it's change or just fear dressed up as longing? Because the next battle is not about silence, it's about discernment. And in the next video, we're going to break down the one difference between regret that fades and transformation that lasts. Not from her side, from yours.